Chapter 3. C Company's CO was Captain John Kleinsmith, a dapper Afrikaner whose name had been anglicised by his family from its original Jan54. The company had been posted to Kapenguria to ensure there could be no attempt by Africans to release Jomo Kenyatta, the leader of the African movement believed to be behind the Mau Mau uprising. He was in jail in Kapenguria and was due to be tried in the new year. So, a year after leaving England, I found myself under canvas again, this time with up-country Europeans in the Northern Frontier District, NFD. Most of the NFD consisted of little more than desert, scrub, and the occasional collection of mud huts. Kapenguria was 50 miles north of the last European farming town of Kitale. It boasted a collection of buildings, including some stone houses with tiled roofs, one of which was the courthouse, others being used as jails. So started the boring routine of guarding a prisoner who was in police custody anyway. Kapenguria had been chosen as the place of trial for the main reason that it was as far as possible away from Jomo Kenyatta's tribal area. We practiced manoeuvres against imaginary Kikuyu attempts to release their leader, although realistically there was little chance of such an event happening. The trial attracted international attention, and a renowned UK lawyer undertook the defence. An airstrip had been laid down for use in aerial surveillance, and for the conveyance of legal representatives and court officials back and forth to Nairobi. I managed to get into the court a couple of times during the trial. Kenyatta's lawyer seemed to be far more competent than the prosecuting counsel. Kenyatta looked composed and at the same time irritated. When answering questions, he never used the usual Europeanized way of saying no, hapana. Rather, he used the emphatic Kiswahili words la or siyo. His magnetic eyes swept the court. He objected to the translators being used, claiming the translations were biased in favour of his accusers. I was now to start 4 roller coaster years of my life. While there were to be some ascents, the general movement was to be a steady downwards, with no end in sight. I had wanted to be a farmer, to own my own farm. I had failed at this in England, and had then tried to stay in agriculture by taking the 4-year Crown Agent's contract to work in Kenya. Now I was in the local forces here, subject to the law of the Governor of Kenya. The Kenya emergency was on, and nobody knew when it would end. In C Company I made friends with Non Kruger, an Afrikaner, whose family owned farms at Eldoret. Non was 6 foot 3 inches tall, his face often set apparently in a scowl. This would then break open into a wide smile followed by loud laughter. On his farm he always wore a sidearm, sometimes 2, a revolver against his thigh and an automatic hanging in a holster from his shoulder. Non's parents had been amongst the earliest trekkers who had driven 2,000 miles by ox cart up from South Africa searching for a new homeland. He was certain the emergency would last many months, even years. And now I was in love, with all the attendant responsibilities I saw ahead of me. I tried to talk to Ingrid on the telephone. The line was almost impossible. Our conversation was stilted, distant voices agreeing love, each hardly able to hear the other among the atmospherics. We wrote regularly. I wrote at length about myself, my life to date. She wrote about her work in the barracks and how she envisaged our lives together. Non listened to me, watching over me like an elder brother, with no great optimism for a happy end to the romance. Then I was thrown out of a truck. Our team had been to Kitale to play a hockey match, and on the way back the truck skidded suddenly. I think I had been standing up, against orders. I came to with a pain at the back of my head and feeling decidedly unwell. Captain Kleinsmith was uncertain what to do. Here was a man with a good report from Rhodesia who now claimed to have pain in his head, shoulder and foot, and who seemed to be unable to perform his duties. I was sent to Kitale Hospital, where my first really conscious moment was seeing the number 15 above my bed, the date of my August birthday. I lay there for 3 days, asking where I was. As fast as I was told, my mind couldn't retain the information, and to the irritation of the other patients, nurses and doctor, I would repeat the question. Eventually I was returned to Kapenguria, the doctor reporting he could find nothing broken. Captain Kleinsmith was in a dilemma. "Can you type, Ozzy?" "Yes, sir." "Right, well, you'd better come into Company HQ here as a clerk, where you can type letters for me." Is this what I went through 2 years OTC at school and 6 months training in Rhodesia for? I asked myself. These up-country thugs think I'm just a malingering Englishman. About all that these people know and love is old-style family music and sport. Well, no, that's not altogether true. They certainly know a lot about how to survive in Africa. Yesterday I was listening to some of them talking about how they deal with hyenas invading their farms. Old kerosene tins are put out, with their tops cut in to the middle from the corners, and meat put into the bottoms of the tins. The hyena presses down to get to the meat, and his head is imprisoned in the tin. So he wanders around until he dies of starvation, or perhaps is attacked and eaten by something else. The Christmas carols were loud and tuneful. Religion and the Dutch Reformed Church were important to them. A bit like the Welsh, I thought, but far more physical. Their ideas of party games are really dangerous. For example, bok-bok. One person bends forward with his hands on a support, a table or a bar or some such. Then the rest of the party have to see how many can jump on his back before he collapses. I suppose they see it as the scrummaging training. I went to Non's farm where I met his mother, an Anglophile who had entertained Queen Elizabeth, the Queen's mother, to tea when she was on safari in Kenya. Non's father had died from a heart attack driving on a bridge over a river just north of Naivasha. I also met Non's wife, Anna, who had been a top javelin and discus thrower in South Africa. She and Non had met at university. She gave up everything to travel in Kenya to marry him. "It must be difficult living with your mother-in-law in the house, Anna." "Oh no, she's wonderful. She has an unbreakable rule. If Non and I have a disagreement, she always backs me." Non was a staunchly religious Afrikaner who understood their history in detail. He explained how his ancestors had got down on their knees before the great battle against the Zulus and prayed that if they won, they would know that the Lord had chosen them over the African. They won, and many years later in Little Eldoret, thousands of miles away, a shrine was opened on one day each year to commemorate the battle and the pact with the Almighty. I heard about the privations, sicknesses and deaths of the early Kenya settlers. I heard how there were many South Africans still alive who had experienced the atrocities of the British concentration camps during the Boer War, and many who had had the stories handed down to them through their families. The Afrikaners' main base in Kenya was around Eldoret, Non's hometown, 90 miles south of Kapenguria. Afrikaner families were close-knit and Victorian in values. Family entertainment was important. Parties, invitation lists always included a friend to play a musical instrument for the dancing. Their games were physical, yet few would belong to their local club, run by Europeans of British stock. Kenyatta was convicted and condemned to imprisonment. The Mau Mau atrocities started to escalate. C Company was posted to Nyeri, the Kenya Regiment's field HQ. Ingrid was asking for a ring so she could demonstrate she was indeed engaged. I got down to Nairobi, where X-rays revealed that, from the truck fall, I had a green stick fracture of the left clavicle, and had probably dislocated a big toe. I sent an expensive diamond solitaire ring to Ingrid. "Oh, my love, you have spent so much money on this ring. We could have got a much better one for the money here in Salisbury. Anyway, thank you very much, By the way, did I tell you, a friend of mine who is a photographer, no need to get jealous, honey, is trying to persuade me to enter the Salisbury beauty competition. What do you think? Hope you like the enclosed photos." In my tent I read the letter with growing disappointment. It was becoming hopeless. How long would the emergency last? I was starting to think it would be many months. How could I possibly hold on to such a girl thousands of miles away? From across the tent, Monty, an agricultural officer developing tilapia fish farming, about which he would talk with great enthusiasm, raised his troubled face from reading a letter. "Ozzy, what does platonic mean?" Another romance hits the dust, I thought, as I prepared to answer. "I can't stand this any longer. Many of my friends are in B Company. B Company Commander Major Anderson was in Malaysia in the war where he earned an MC. He's a real leader who leads from the front. I can't work for people I don't respect. I'm just not made that way. I can't pretend to have enthusiasm when I don't have any. I'm going to apply for a transfer." "How about it, Monty? Let's apply for a transfer to Company B." At this time I got my first taste of the high rate of accidents that were in this war. With my Bren, I was on guard travelling in the front of a truck. I put a spare loaded magazine on the floor of the truck for easy access. When we reached our destination, the magazine was gone. It had bounced its way onto the road through a hole in the bottom of the truck. There was not a chance of ever finding it. So, of course, I was on a charge and received an admonishment. With a couple of African askaris, I was on one operation with elements of the British Army. We crept out of camp in the early hours to set up an ambush, into which it was planned that Mau Mau, Mickeys, would be driven, much like a pheasant shoot in UK. After some time sitting in ambush, a senior British NCO noticed that one of his men was, in his opinion, unshaven. There followed a loud accusation and discussion. My askaris looked at me in amazement, went away and sat down. Obviously, there was not a slightest chance now of ambushing anyone. Then I became ill from food poisoning. The local Europeans seemed so much more able to cope with the stresses of the climate and unhygienic food. My hands swelled up so that I could hardly use them. Into the field hospital where I was recovering was carried a man dying from a burst of automatic fire. Fire from a Sten gun which was being cleaned by a colleague in the tent next to his. And this colleague was a friend of mine, an Afrikaner, well used to the handling of firearms day by day on the farm, where cattle had to be protected from lions, leopards, hyenas. Even he had made a fatal mistake. My transfer was approved in May and I joined B Company. CO Major Peter Anderson to IC Captain Ray Nightingale, real soldiers both. Later, Ray Nightingale was to make a successful career in the British Army, becoming a colonel in the SAS. It was decided that a medical pack should be carried by each platoon. I volunteered and was sent down to Nairobi to attend the related short medical course at the British Military Hospital. At this, I learned it is not possible to contract VD from a lavatory seat, what a surgical operation may be like. It was a lumbar puncture at which a friend very Beckley fainted, and how to bandage limbs. From a practical viewpoint, the important lesson was how to handle and administer morphine. From then on, I carried a medical pack. Only a few days later, on a combined Army-Police ambush, there was a confused melee and, right in front of me, a police askari was shot in the stomach. He sat down slowly without a word, as the blood oozed from the wound. Just a sick look had come over his face as his legs gave way and he slumped into a sitting position. I gave him the relevant morphine jab and organised his safe removal from the action. He survived. Thereafter, I have always been irritated to see on films how people hit by gunfire throw their arms up in the air, flail around grotesquely or drop over a balustrade. On news films from the 2 world wars, when people are hit, they sink or drop, no dramatics or Hollywood extravagances. I had been listening to Platoon Commander Bill Turnbull. He told us that to get the KIR really fired up, a film had been shown to them of the Lowry massacre. This included all the macabre sights of women with their fetuses torn out and stuffed in their mouths. But rather than getting fired up, the KAR had been quite amused by it all. The KAR had very few Kikuyu in it, and after all, in the Lowry massacre, it was the Kikuyu who had been massacred, and by other Kikuyu. The film is not going to be shown again. Whenever we went on ambush operations from Nyeri, it seemed the Mau Mau had moved out of the area shortly before we arrived. There were rumours of careless talk and suspicions centred on the African bar staff. People remembered hearing of similar problems in Cairo in the war. Bar talk had apparently reached the Germans. In any event, it was becoming increasingly obvious to the regiment we had to go on prolonged operations, live in the forest for as long as possible. So Madge Anderson led us into the forest on a patrol that was to last 8 days. I was feeling unenthusiastic about life. Hell, I'm not enjoying this. We've been in the forest for a week. I can't sleep at night, it's so cold. I now have my own fleas which crawl around me all through the night. We've been getting water by chopping into large bamboo canes or scooping up water from little pools on the track, even elephants' footholes. One night we were all woken up because a rhino wandered through the camp. Tok Engelbrecht shot at it with a very light, which scared it off, thank God. We can be as careful as possible. With a large number of people, we're going to make too much noise. In one spot we set up camp for a day and patrolled out. I was not in the patrol that was ambushed, but I heard all the firing. Our chaps didn't have much to say when they got back. I didn't hear of any heroics. I guess they just hit the ground and prayed for the firing to stop. Which it did, of course, because the Mickeys were armed mainly with homemade guns and were pretty short of ammunition. I was chatting with Monty. He certainly is a star, that Punch Bearcroft. Why is he called Punch? Well, he's said to look like him. You know, the Punch of Punch and Judy shows. Oh, well, wasn't he wounded with the RAF in the war? Yes, I believe so. Anyway, he certainly managed to drop those supplies to us, spot on target, so we can extend our patrol. But the noise of the aircraft must have alerted the Mau Mau, don't you think? Anyway, I'm bloody glad we joined B Company, Monty, with Major Anderson. He's obviously a brave man and a fine leader, and I'm glad to be with him. Yes, said Monty, but he's very religious, and I'm starting to ask myself if it is with the Almighty he confers when he is at a junction in the paths. I laughed. Or is he just tossing up? Well, the maps are useless. They show nothing more than the outlines of the major rivers, nothing else. I certainly wouldn't want to be the major. No, nor would I. Remember that skirmish the other day when we captured that Mick with his skull broken open by one of our bullets? Oh no, you weren't there. Well, we interrogated him, and it seems certain he was involved with the gang who chopped up that Italian sawmill manager and his family. Chopped up the children alive, starting with their hands and feet, then arms and legs. We couldn't take the Mick with us. The Major told us to carry on patrolling ahead. We heard shots behind us. The Major rejoined us and didn't speak to anyone for the rest of the day. What an impossible position for a religious person like him to be in. Yes, said Monty. And do you know, I heard the other day that in some large stores in London there have been collection boxes opened for the Mau Mau. Oh no, that can't be true, can it? Our patrol could stay out no longer. The Major was uncertain whether or not it had proved anything. Perhaps the principal was right, but the unit we had used was too large. Anyway, it was time to get out of the forest back to base camp. Our head tracker was a European farmer's son, Jim Tooley, who was more skillful even than our African Askari trackers. Brought up from childhood as a blood brother of the Kikuyu, he was at home in the forest. On patrol he wore an army greatcoat in all weathers. He was so good at tracking that later he was asked with Monty to set up and run the regiment's tracking school. "Jim, I think it's time to funga safari. Looking at the map here, it seems to me that the way back to camp is to follow the river shown here," said the Major. "You see it? What do you think?" "Well, sir, I'm sorry to say that I can't read maps, and with respect, I don't agree. The way back to the camp is that way," Jim pointed. "But Jim, look at the map. I'm just telling you the way back is in that direction." Silence. "Well, Jim, all right, I'll follow your advice, but you'd better be right." And he was. On another patrol, Jim stopped, sat down for a break, and stated that he sensed there was a gang nearby and something would happen soon. Sure enough, there was a burst of fire from the recce group, which contained Mickey Fernandez, whose sister had nearly been shot recently by the Mau Mau. Mickey was firing in all directions. To his surprise, on follow-up, he found he had hit a girl. Now we had the wounded Kikuyu girl, messenger or camp follower, on our hands. "Kill her off! We can't take her with us. She can't walk and we can't carry her." Jim was not listening. He was not interested in that sort of talk. To him she was an Ndugu. He crooned over her, fed her, whispered encouragement to her in Kikuyu. The patrol was wound up. It proved enormously difficult to carry the girl along narrow tracks in the bamboo forest on a makeshift bamboo stretcher to where she could get proper medical attention, but it was done. It was an experience I never forgot. Carrying people over long distances is for Hollywood films, I thought. "We've just been issued with British Army jungle boots. They're useless. Not only are their soles too narrow, but they're made of some rubbery material which is slippery when wet. Since most of our patrols are in damp conditions, and sometimes we have to scramble over rocks and cross sizable streams, they're really dangerous. We're all going back to using our leather ammunition boots." Britain started sending in units of its National Service Army to show our Territorial Army how to deal with the Mau Mau. Over the years, the Gloucesters, Northumberland Fusiliers, Devons, Blackwatch, Inniskillings were all in Kenya. Some of them, e.g. the Blackwatch, had come from Korea and had been expecting to go home. They were not impressed to be given instead another overseas posting. The Kenya settlers were delighted to receive the battalion from Scotland and open their homes to them. With surprise, we noticed that the first aim of the British Army seemed to be to get their sports organised. Polo for the officers, football for the others. Up went the goalposts and telephone inquiries started, referenced the availability of polo ponies and their fodder. Well, I suppose our Kenya problems mean little to them. They're not going to have to live with the results of this mess, I thought. When the Gloucesters arrived, a small group of Kenya Regiment lads were put forward as potential local advisors to the regiment. The Gloucesters' CO cast an eye over them, started, and asked one of them, "Don't I know you? Didn't we play polo together at Cheltenham?" "Yes, sir." "What's your name?" "Double Barrel, sir." "Yes, of course. Adjutant, put a call through to the Kenya Regiment CO saying I recommend that this man be promoted immediately to second lieutenant. Then, Double Barrel, you can not only be a Kenya advisor with us, but you can strengthen our officers' mess polo team." Double Barrel looked discomfited in front of his comrades, but that was it, and it was done. "Honey, I've told you how I've won this local competition and I'm now Miss Salisbury. Well, it's being suggested I should enter for Miss South Africa. What do you think? I have to sign a form saying I'm not engaged to be married, so of course I won't be able to wear the ring. Hope you understand, dearest. Love, Ingrid." My younger sister Valda had won the British ice skating title early in 1952, soon after my arrival in Kenya. Following that, she came third in the World Championships. She was sending me photos of herself in professional ice shows. Then I had a letter from her, informing me Mum had left Dad and would live with her from now on. This upset me. Rather silly, I suppose. The reason I was where I was. I wanted to build a new life, but it was unsettling to see the bridges to my past disappearing. On the 2nd of June 1953, Coronation Day, I was in the platoon commanded by Bill Turnbull, which moved as the advance party of B Company into Location 12, Fort Hall. This was considered to be the most dangerous Kikuyu location in Kenya. Eventually, our camp had a perimeter made up of several feet of sharpened bamboo stakes, each emerging a foot out of the ground, covered with rolls of barbed wire. Inside that, there were roofed dugouts, into which we were to move for action if the camp was attacked. From this camp we went out on night patrols. I'd come to enjoy these. We blackened our faces, necks and arms with charcoal and cocoa, and there was a real sense of excitement. One night we came across a gang who were fast asleep in a row under their blankets. While the one on the end was manhandled, simultaneously the others were shot. It was all over in seconds. We couldn't take any risks. The prisoner was then interrogated. On patrol, I used to carry the Bren slung on my shoulder for immediate firing from the hip if necessary. Even when used lying down on a firing range, the Bren had quite a large cone of fire. From the hip, this was exaggerated further. One day, a Mick ran across the trail ahead of me, avoiding a whole magazine that I emptied at him. On another patrol with part of B Company, led by Ray Nightingale, we had Davo with us. Below us, a gang came into view. I got down behind the Bren, ready to give short bursts as I had been taught. Unfortunately, the Bren was on dry soil, and I only got off 2 bursts before a cloud of dust obliterated my view. Beside me lay Davo, the man who never swore. Certainly he came close to it then. Ray Nightingale ordered, "Cease fire!" as Davo disappeared silently through the scrub down towards where the gang had been. Some short time later we heard his Beretta chattering. After a renewed silence he suddenly reappeared. I never experienced anyone move so fast, so quietly. "Okay, Ozzy, you got one and wounded one," was his only comment as we got ourselves together again to resume patrolling. Davo showed me how his .45 specials were holstered. They did not have to be pulled out of their holsters, as shown by Hollywood in westerns. The long barrels of his revolvers were sitting in springs strapped to his thighs, so that when he drew, all he had to do was turn them up so that they sprang out and faced their targets. One day, at first light, a small patrol was quietly searching through a deserted village on the outskirts of the forest. They pushed open the door of a hut, and there was Davo in bed. "Look, he's fast asleep. Anyone could get him," whispered someone. "Could they, Cobber?" came a voice from the blankets as they were thrown off, revealing Davo with his Beretta submachine gun laying down the front of his body, the barrel pointing straight at the door. That's how he always went to sleep. I was talking to Jerry Coulson, our Sergeant Major, whose father owned a photographic shop in Nairobi. "God, I'm so tired, Terry. It's impossible to get a night's sleep." "We've all got that problem, Ozzy. What I want is that you keep your standards up. Look at you. You're unshaven." "Oh, come on, Terry. We had a lecture the other day from that British jungle expert who said that being unshaven had advantages. You're not so easily seen, and you're less likely to get skin sores." "I don't care what he said, Ozzy. Go and bloody well get shaven." "Yes, Terry." There were night patrols, night guard duties, and the siafu. My dictionary describes them as reddish-brown ants that bite fiercely. They travel in large swarms and attack all living creatures alike. There seemed to be no certainty as to when they would move or change direction or decide to go from here to there. We'd been putting out lines of wood ash soaked in kerosene, which seemed to have some effect on deterring them, but one night I woke up in the early hours of the morning and lay there admiring the moon's rays through the door flap of the tent. Suddenly it came to me that my stomach was alive. An army of ants was moving up one of my bed legs, across my stomach, and down the other side. Well, I did what anyone else would have done. I sat up with a start. Someone in the ants' army informed them that they were being attacked, and every one of the hundreds on my stomach bit me at the same time. Well, you might as well lay a red-hot poker across your stomach. I'm still trying to recover. And Terry Coulson talked about the importance of shaving. Hey, Ozzy, did you know that joker Sid Maskoff? I should do. I slept a couple of beds away from him for 6 months in Rhodesia. Well, you know he's a fitness fanatic, strong as an ox. Yes, at the Salisbury Barracks gym he worked on the weights reserved for heavyweights, although he's only a middleweight. Well, man, in Nairobi the other day he was at a party putting up marquees for some bazaar or something. There he is, man, nonchalant as you like, just holding a rope. Well, one of the Rifle Brigade big buanas started shouting at him to do something useful, like go put up another marquee. So he said, yes, sir, dropped the rope he had been holding, and the whole marquee fell in. He had been holding it up by himself. Oh, come on, that takes some believing. It's true, man, I'm telling you. In the field, the platoon officers also were under stress and subject to examination. There was Bill Turnbull, ex-Downside Public School and now manager on a Brookbond tea estate in Kericho. A fervent Roman Catholic and family man, he bitterly resented being called up. In the war, he had been an officer in a special unit, whose job was to ferry Secret Service agents across the Mediterranean and the Aegean. He had little experience of any other form of military action. Bill saw no point in risking his and his platoon's lives. Every 50 minutes, the patrol would stop for 10 minutes, as per regulation he had seen somewhere, regardless of the situation. A score was kept at company and regiment HQs of the number of Mau Mau killed. It was rumoured Bill was heard on his radio inquiring the score one day. No, no, he chided the man on the other end. Not the Mau Mau score, you fool. The cricket score in the test match at the Oval. Let's get our priorities right, can we? What is the cricket score? I was in action with him once only. He placed the platoon alongside a well-worn track, which looked as if it could be well used by Mau Mau gangs, and set up an overnight ambush. We bedded down under our ponchos on one side of the track, each person being given his field of fire, into which he was ordered to empty his magazine if action flared up. It was drizzling. I tied the head of my poncho to a sapling and dozed off, waiting to be woken up in due course for my sentry go. Suddenly there were shouts and shots. I awoke with a start, charged forward into the sapling, recoiled seeing stars, roared past the sapling and let off my Bren magazine from the hip into the field of fire, into the night. Very satisfying. A torch shone and I saw Bill standing nearby. All right, Corporal, very exciting firework display, but you don't really think there's anyone there, do you? I don't know, sir, just obeying orders. All right, stand down, everyone, Bill ordered. He was embarrassed. What a fiasco it had been. A young Kenya lad, soft as you please, not a spot of aggression in him, had been lying on his stomach on early sentry go, looking down the track. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, he had thought he saw movement. It couldn't be, surely, please no. He moved into a crouch. Where, Nanny? He inquired in a stage whisper, which turned into a shout as a Simi plunged into the track in front of him, showering earth into his eyes. He couldn't see a thing now, and could think of nothing more he could do but to let off a couple of rounds and alert the platoon by shouting, Mau Mau! That was the signal for the fireworks. Of course the gang, of which the Simi thrower had been the first in line, had already scattered. Not one had entered our ambush. Another platoon commander, David Bradbury, had been an RAF flying officer in the war. As far as he was concerned, all patrol movement had to stay on a compass bearing. It didn't seem to matter about the lie of the land, that it would be more sensible to go off the bearing for a time. The orders he gave were to stay on the bearing, sometimes causing considerable additional hardship to the platoon. Once I was in action with him, After we'd worked hard practicing what we would do if we were ambushed, hopefully it would be the recce group who would be the first to engage, and so the main body of the platoon would have time to react. Sometimes the Mau Mau would manage to let the recce group go by before they were discovered. In that case, the ambush would explode into the middle of the patrolling platoon. In any event, the ambush coming from one side of the track, it was then important to roll up the gang by a flanking movement, which would envelop the gang if it tried to hold to its position. So left flanking or right flanking were orders to be bellowed at by me in such situations. With the Bren gun, I would have the main firepower. The platoon commander would be up front behind the recce group, and the platoon sergeant would be towards the rear. Suddenly there was the sound of shots from the front. I could hear David Bradbury's Sten gun. I waited for orders. The firing went on. A Mick broke cover in the forest on the right. "Right flanking!" I shouted, and so we moved round to the right, enveloping nobody. The main body of the ambush was on the left. "Sorry, Corporal, I forgot." I moved off to the left with a few of my section following a blood spoor. From a small thicket there came a shot, apparently aimed at us. "Quick, move round there, I'll cover you," I ordered. They looked at me. Being shot at can be frightening. I clambered to my feet with my Bren and moved towards the thicket. It had been the last gesture of a dying man. We found him under a blanket, with his little 2.5 automatic in one hand, dead. Davo was with us again. He loved to show off his legendary prowess with guns and was not afraid of putting himself up front. We were just outside the camp, where we were now really established. "Come on," he said, "let's see how good you are in action." He asked us to put up a target in the scrub. He then came round the corner of the trail, spotted the target, threw himself sideways to the ground, let off the whole magazine of his Beretta, and when we counted, only 2 of the 20 or so bullets had missed their target. We were mightily impressed. Davo looked around at his assembled admirers and summoned one that looked at him like an unlikely specimen. "Now, you have a go." Keith Cairns was a languid, blonde-haired, inoffensive-looking lad of no particular stature or presence. However, we all knew that, while he possessed no obvious sporting or athletic prowess, Keith was one of those people who were a natural with a gun. Give him any kind of gun, and he was immediately comfortable with it and able to shoot better with it than any of his contemporaries. The onlookers' interest rose. Around the corner sauntered Keith, with the Beretta submachine gun he had never touched before. At sight of the target he flung himself sideways, let off the magazine, and when we counted, not a single bullet had missed the target. After dark we could hear Davo sitting by himself in his tent, morosely practicing his trigger pressure on his revolvers. He was an unhappy man. On one small patrol towards evening in dense forest, we followed a game path which ended in a clearing with 2 or 3 exits from it. In no time we discovered we had made our way into the congregating area of a herd of buffalo. Whichever exit we tried to take, there were buffalo moving in on us. It was quite an unnerving experience. We had to use our weapons and the local buffalo know-how of the Kenyans to escape in one piece. Another day, another situation, another prisoner. He was a simple nobody, a Mick from another gang. He sat there miserable, afraid. His eyes grew wide as mine hardened. "Hapana piga mimi," he screamed. I remembered his cry for the rest of my life. Around this time, Michael Blundell, a leading Kenya politician, came to visit the regiment in the field. "You must not let the nastiness around you and your experience brutalize you. Stay true to your upbringing, your education, your civilization, your Christianity," he urged. Next day we were off into the forest again on what was to be a 3 to 4 day patrol, the maximum rations we could carry. By that evening one of my section, Harvey Storm, had damaged his ankle. Next morning I was ordered to take 2 Askaris and escort Harvey out of the forest to where, hopefully, we could pick up a truck for camp. We made a bamboo crutch for him and moved slowly throughout the long day. I had never been able to sleep soundly at night in the forest. It was too cold. Even in full uniform inside a sleeping bag with my boots as a pillow, I rarely slept for long. This night an enormous storm blew up. We managed to cook some supper, and then the full force of the storm hit us. Every clap of thunder had me leaping round, with gun at the ready. The lightning seemed to penetrate our black and camouflaged faces alike. The four of us were white with apprehension, and no one could have been happier than I was to meet the 6 a.m. dawn as it started to filter through the trees. So we laboured to the edge of the forest where, that evening, a regimental Land Rover picked us up. I brooded over the training we had had in Rhodesia, that had been mainly in grassland, yet here the action in Kenya was in forest. I recalled an old film we had been required to watch, which had been all about patrolling from fixed trenches. First World War stuff, almost totally inappropriate to our present situation. I hear we've just had the first 2 casualties among people I know well, from my barrack room. Apparently Uncle Joe went bananas in Rhodesia when he heard of it. Although he gave us all a hard time, Uncle Joe always had a soft spot for the smaller recruits, perhaps because, for a guardsman, he himself was on the short side. Mick Cantonius, the genial little Greek lad, and Mike Dowie from Ireland, who slept next to him, have both been killed in the same action, along with 2 other Kenya Regiment conscripts. It appears they came up against a particularly resourceful Mick, who shot them all one after another, and from inside the thatched roof of a Kayuki hut. Takes some believing, but that's what I've heard. And one of our 4, taken wounded into the BMH, was turned away because he was not British forces. What is going on? Later he died in the Nairobi hospital. John Bombay Barrett, a large man whose family owned a ranch in the Rift Valley outside Nakuru, had had to leave his wife and daughter there when he was called up. He had an agricultural degree from Reading and saw his life as farming and family. He was demoralised and indignant at his present state. Every spare moment he seemed to be on his bed writing to the Manpower Commission, applying for special exemption from call-up. So his letters went out and the refusals came back, and his unhappiness grew. So resentful did he become that it affected his whole being. One night, fast asleep at our Fort Hall camp, when being shaken on the shoulder by Monty to take his turn on night guard duty, he surged up in bed with a roar and attacked him. Thereafter he was awoken for night guard duty by a long length of bamboo. Then General Erskine, the new British commander of the emergency forces, decided to clear the forest, map square by map square. Bombay was hacking and grumbling his way through the square we had been allocated. This was proving to be virtually impenetrable forest, where even the animals were absent, let alone the mau-mau. Then someone stumbled onto a piece of bamboo. It flicked up into a hornet's nest, whose inhabitants surged out. Nobody saw anyone move as fast as Bombay. As far as he was concerned, impenetrable forest had quickly become decidedly penetrable. One lad was badly stung all over his face and head. For a time we feared for his life. Well, Ozzy, how about you said about... Bombay was quietly giving me an agricultural quiz and lesson as we lay on our beds. Suddenly there was a lot of noise from the other end of the camp. I could hear Ray Nightingale's voice, and he was not pleased about something. The company was on high alert, so all weapons were kept loaded, ready for immediate action. Hell, I better pretend to be doing something. I took back the butt of my Bren, removed the working parts and started oiling them. Eventually the 21C's voice died down. I put back the working parts and shut up the butt. The bullet passed close by Bombay, through several tents, and surprised an on-guard Askari by taking the tip off his spear as it wanged off into the afternoon air. "Corporal, you are the very last person who is going to get away with anything like this. You are extremely lucky that I let off the Sergeant Major this morning regarding a grenade incident. Dismiss." Shortly after this, September 1953, I was offered promotion to sergeant to start the regimental police at Nairobi HQ. Wondering if Ray Nightingale was glad to see the back of me, I accepted somewhat unenthusiastically. "Honey, I am now Miss South Africa 1953 and being entered for Miss Universe. I do understand your remarks in your last letter and I enclose the ring. I will go see your mother and sister when I'm in England. Keep safe, Ingrid." At Nairobi Regiment HQ, Dick Smith joined me. Similar in height and build to myself, he had been in No. 2 Squad in Rhodesia. The CO, Colonel Guy Campbell, informed us the regiment had been getting a poor name through slack dress and behaviour of our men in Nairobi. Our job was to put a stop to it. Our uniform was dark blue beret with the gold buffalo badge, short-sleeved khaki tunic with white webbing and pistol holster, 3 stripes, RP armband on regimental colours, khaki shorts, long khaki socks topped by regimental colours, white anklets, and of course highly polished ammunition boots. Initially we were to be instructed by a green jacket warrant officer, WO. The WO in question was considered by his colleagues to have been quite a hero. During the war in Europe, whilst on an infamous march over many miles in appalling weather, he had given his boots to a youngster. Consequently, he had collected gangrene in his feet, and because of that, after the war, his colleagues saw to it that he was looked after and retained in the brigade. His mental ability, however, was a little uncertain. He took Dick and me, all smartly dressed in our white webbing, on a strut around Nairobi for a couple of evenings, during which time he told off every soldier who, in his view, was improperly dressed, irrespective of their regiment. The result of this was a red-hot telephone line to our colonel. From then on, Dick and I did our work unsupervised, confining our activities to Kenya Regiment personnel only. Those whom we approached for incorrect dress were put on a charge. If, as was often the case, the relevant company commander dismissed the charge, it didn't matter, because in all probability the experience would remind the soldier to be dressed correctly when next in town. So, this work consisted of high visibility marching down to and around town, slipping into a saloon for a frame of snooker, marching around and up out of town and back to HQ in time for lunch. Within a short time we knew we were winning. A settler couple stopped us to remark how proud they were to see all the Kenya Regiment soldiers so smartly dressed compared to the others. My God, death, disease and destruction are with us always in Africa. Every night up at HQ I can hear shots from somewhere in the city. One day Dick and I were marching back from town up the hill towards HQ when an African on a bicycle came hurtling down the slope from the right. He tried to turn left, lost control, flew from the saddle and landed with his chin on top of a metal road sign. I've never seen anything like it. He must have smashed his jaw in pieces. We hurried up to see what we could do. As we arrived, another European with a van pulled up. "Okay, put him in the van. I'm on my way to the hospital with another in the back." So we put the African into the van and he was driven away to the hospital. Not a day seemed to go by without meeting some life and death drama. I met Wilf in town and with his help bought a 1-year-old Morris Cowley van. Prepared to Wilf's Jowett Javelin, my wagon would be slow, but it would be reliable. I put a bag or two of sand in the back to provide weight over the drive wheels, and for bad weather safaris I bought studded rear tread tyres. A more delicate and difficult part of the job was looking after Kenya Regiment prisoners under open arrest. We had to be with them at all time, and yet make their lives tolerable as they waited for their cases to come up. Two of them were charged with indiscriminate shooting of Africans, and the thought of either or both of them making a break for it was always with me. We tried to help them occupy the hours. One was mechanically minded, and he and I agreed he could decoke my van for a small fee, just to have something to do. I was in court during the trial of this particular prisoner. The court interpreter used for the African witnesses was a Kenya Regiment European, who was particularly fluent in upcountry Swahili. This was the basic Swahili, which had been developed over the years into the lingua franca of the country. Pure Kiswahili was spoken only down at the coast and in missionary schools and by colonial servants, and a few Kenya settlers like Michael Blundell. As the case progressed, the judge became increasingly uneasy about the translations. His unease came to a head when, translating colours such as black or white, the interpreter would say, "Rangiya," colour of, and then identify something in the courtroom that was black or white. In fact, there were different shades of colour, of course, which may be better picked out by pointing at them rather than describing them in words. But the judge was unimpressed. Even he knew that black was Nyesu and white was Nyepi. He demanded a change of interpreter, and an African was found who could do the job more to the judge's liking. Again, it was difficult when our prisoners' lawyers arrived to interview them, how to keep charge of the prisoners and yet provide them with the lawyer-client confidentiality essential for our tradition of justice. There was no way the lawyers would accept the indignity of being locked in. At this time I heard that a friend, Clive Simmons, had been killed in Bikoi. On patrol in the forest, his platoon had been ordered to surround their night position with grenade booby traps. Clive had woken before sunup and had thought that the early morning light and the mist would make for an excellent photo. With his camera he had moved out, touched a booby-trapped wire and collected the grenade shrapnel in his back. I went down to the Nyeri Beach Hotel for a week's leave. There could be no experience more pleasurable than making love on a beach at night, with a warm breeze from the Indian Ocean blowing up your shirt tails, I thought. I was losing my virginity to Giovanna, an Italian childminder. She was one of those tall, well-built girls from northern Italy. Shaped like the film star Silvana Mangano, we met on the beach after dark, after her charge had been put to bed. "I have you, I have him, but I have no one," she murmured. I had thought I was doing pretty well. After all, earlier that day I had envisaged how strong and good-looking any child of ours would be. "Him? Who's him?" I asked irritably. I felt my enthusiasm wane. Slowly, haltingly, the story came out. Her elderly employer had been trying it on with her, but he had trouble with his performance. That's some consolation, I thought. But our relationship was never the same after that. We shook hands when she left for Nairobi. I met her there once, by arrangement at Thor's Hotel, but she was distant, and it was obvious that, for her, the affair was over. Another friend has been killed, Very Beckley from B Company, who had fainted on the medical course at the site of a lumbar puncture. I heard he was with the KAR and, well camouflaged, went forward to Recce. Coming back through the bush, he was shot by one of his own men. Kenya's European young men were no different from others anywhere in the world. I was sitting listening to two of them. Yes, well, you see, there was this Swedish air hostess who started visiting me. Oh, yeah? Yes, and eventually we went to bed. I was rather bothered because this was my first time and I'm unusually large when aroused. Oh, yeah? So anyway, I was glad to find that she could take me all right, and she was well pleased. Yeah? And did you give her an orgasm? What? What? Well, yes, of course I did. Yeah? You did not? I don't believe you. Well, what was it like? What? What was what like? Her orgasm. Oh, her orgasm. Look, I'm not going to go into such personal details. Let's change the subject, shall we? Oh yeah? Well, I'm not too jealous, because I had this married dame on the boat coming up from Durban. It was my first evening, and, after dinner, I was looking out over the rail at the shore lights of Mozambique, when there was this woman, this dame, who came and leant on the rail next to me. We looked at one another, she winked, then she asked me to follow her, so I did, all the way down to her cabin. What? There, she said, look, I've been watching you. You had the sort of body I go for. Now, I'm not interested in love or anything like that, but I do fancy your body, and I do know about sex. I pointed out that I was very inexperienced, and there she just said she would teach me everything she knew. I stripped down and she said, right, look closely, let's start at the beginning. This is my vagina. What? Oh, come on, you don't expect me to believe that. No, listen, she did, and we made love all day and all night. Oh yeah? What, 5 times, I suppose? Well, no, 5 times was just the daytime program. We stepped it up at night. What? Oh, come on, man. What'd you take us for? We didn't come up with the last rains, you know. Oh, it's true, man. I don't want you guys to get too jealous, but it's true. By the time we got to Mombasa, I'd learned quite a lot. What? Geez, I need a drink. One of our prisoners, Swanny Poel, was developing a tendency to have fits. We tried to help him by supplying reading material, playing chess, cards, anything to keep his mind occupied and prevent a fit from starting. The medics believed he was shamming, and eventually one evening I was asked to take him to the BMH for tests. I had slung on an old army greatcoat which concealed my rank and white webbing. The medical staff shouted at me, almost as if I was the prisoner myself. Swanny was then ordered into bed, and I sat in a chair alongside. I have always been able to rest and doze, and yet be awake at the same time, so when in the middle of the night the door slowly opened and a form moved stealthily towards me, I was ready. "Hello, sister," I asked loudly. "Is there anything I can do for you?" Her face was a picture as I switched on the light and took off my overcoat, thereby revealing my white webbing and rank. Then the sycophancy started. "Yes, Sergeant. No, Sergeant. 3 bags full, Sergeant." A marked change from my earlier reception when the hospital staff had thought I was just a lowly private. Swanny was acquitted eventually of all charges. The third job we had was discipline around HQ, and thus occasionally we were required to put some unfortunate through punishment drill. So it came to be my lot to drill Abby Morton. Abby could be a bit of a makora. He was one of those people who did not take kindly to army discipline, and yet, as I found out in Rhodesia, he could be resourceful in action. He was a mate, and I did not relish the task of punishing him. However, he eased the way. "Give it to me hard, Ozzy. I can take it," he said. So I did, and he could, and I like to think that we would always be friends. During this time I had a really unpleasant experience. For some unknown reason, a green jacket sergeant had taken a dislike to me and reported me for neglecting my prisoner, Swanny. Up in front of the adjutant, I denied the charge. The adjutant called in Swanny. To everyone's surprise, Swanny recounted how the sergeant had approached him and asked him to collude in fixing me. The charge was dismissed, and soon afterwards the sergeant returned to UK. This was really the last straw for me. Dick and I had now been joined by a young Afrikaner who seemed to disagree with everything I said. Surely I'd completed the task I'd been sent, and essential as the work was, there must be more interesting things to do, I thought. The adjutant found me an opening in field intelligence.